the case I never meant to tell it, is not my habit, as those readers who have followed the strange fortunes of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes already know, to set down upon paper any narrative merely because it is odd, or merely because it is grand. London has seen many odd things, and the world has seen many grand ones, but there are only a few affairs in which the human heart and the human mind meet beneath such a sky that the whole business seems touched by fate. This was one of them. Before men had crossed the dark between the earth and the moon, before the great silver rockets had become a common picture in newspapers and schoolbooks, before the word space had grown gentle with use, there was, in a young American agency built on hope, fear, noise, and mathematics, a single death in a quiet room. It was a death so calm in its first appearance, so small against the thunder of engines that many would have passed it by, if from that still body on a chair, from that cooling cup on a desk, from the faint white dust near a pillbox, and the tired grief in the eyes of men and women who were trying to build a road into heaven, there opened one of the last and most extraordinary investigations ever undertaken by Sherlock Holmes. Even now, when I let my mind return to it, I feel again that singular union of opposites which marked the whole adventure. There was the old world with its habits of courtesy, its trains, its handwritten letters, its lonely gardens, its talk before the fire. There was the new world with its clean metal corridors, its drawing boards, its humming wires, its clipped American urgency, and above all, its dream of rising beyond the clouds. There was age beside youth, memory beside invention, and the long shadow of war lying across bright rooms, where young mathematicians bent over chalkboards and spoke of the moon as if it were not poetry, but work. And at the center of all this stood Holmes, very lean, very quiet old in years, and yet more alive in mind than many men are at 30, with his eyes alight in that clear way, which meant that he had found not only a mystery, but one worthy of his last and finest powers. There are many reasons why I delayed the publication of this history. Some are personal. Some concern reputations that at the time were still tender. Some belong to governments, agencies, and institutions that preferred silence to embarrassment. Yet the deepest reason lies elsewhere. I scarcely knew myself how to fix the adventure in words, for it seemed to belong to no proper shelf in time. If the reader wishes to raise an objection, saying that the age of Sherlock Holmes and the age of rockets cannot truly have met, I shall not quarrel with him. The world is not arranged only by calendars. There are moments when one century leans into another, and men who appear to belong to an earlier chapter of history step quietly into the next. So it was with Holmes. So it was with Holmes. And so it was, on a cold evening touched by sea mist and bee smoke in Sussex, when a letter came across the ocean and carried us toward a murder under the young flag of NASA. Sussex in the last quiet season, by the time this adventure began, Holmes had long since withdrawn from the public exercise of his great talents, the passionate violin, the chemical experiments, the sudden midnight departures from Baker Street, the disguises the gang leaders, blackmailers, noblemen, adventuresses, and murderers of an earlier day all seemed to belong, as he himself once remarked, to a life that had been lived by another man. He had settled into that curious retirement which only Holmes could make at once tranquil and intellectually fierce. His small house upon the Sussex Downs stood among fields that changed with the weather like folded silk. In summer there came the bees, upon whose habits he had written with a seriousness that amused some and astonished others. In winter there was the fire, the lamp, his papers, his long walks over the hills, and those rare messages from old corners of Europe or London, which only now and then tempted him back into the concerns of men. I was myself no longer young. The years had laid their plain hand upon me. Though I believe I retained enough strength of body and openness of mind to serve my friend in the modest capacity he sometimes still required, my medical practice had passed into younger hands. My hair had thinned, my step had slowed, but my affection for Holmes had not altered. I visited him whenever I could, There were evenings when he said very little, and others when he spoke with that dry humor and sudden tenderness which only his closest companions knew how to hear. He had become, in age, less sharp in manner and more deep in feeling, though never sentimental. It is one of the many misunderstandings about Holmes that the public imagines him cold. He was not cold. He was exact. Under that exactness there was often mercy, and under the mercy a fierce respect for truth. On the evening of which I speak, the sky had turned to a soft iron color, and the last of the light lay across the fields like a memory that did not wish to depart. Holmes sat near the window with a paper upon his knee, though he was not reading. I had brought tobacco and certain newspapers, and Mrs. Hudson, who had by then become not simply a landlady of memory but a kind of distant household saint in our conversations, had been affectionately mentioned over supper. Holmes had lately been occupied with bees in a manner that suggested meditation rather than study. He said that bees, like governments, appeared orderly at a distance and frantic at close range. I laughed, and he permitted himself the slight narrowing of the eyes that meant he was not displeased. It was then that the post arrived, a late delivery brought by a local hand who knew the habits of the cottage. Holmes took the envelope and, before opening it, held it a moment against the lamplight. "American," said he. I looked up. By the stamp? By the paper, the machine cut, the haste of the address, the quality of the ink, and the red dust of the flap. A dry climate, yet the writer has handled metal tools. There's also a restraint in the hand, Watson, which suggests a person accustomed to writing official phrases while wishing to say something personal. He slid it open with the old precision and read in silence. A change came over him, though to most men it might have passed unnoticed. His shoulders, which a few moments before had carried the gentle weariness of an old evening, became alert. His eyes sharpened. The years did not fall from him, for age remained upon him plainly enough, yet I saw the intellect within rise like a lamp newly fed. "Well?" I asked. He handed me the letter. It was from one Dr. Lucille Harrow, an Anglo-American aeronautical specialist attached to a newly established American agency known formally as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The language was careful, but beneath its care there trembled urgency. A senior guidance expert at a remote research and test site in New Mexico had died under circumstances judged natural by local examination and yet troubling to those who had known him best. There were reasons of security, politics, and public confidence why the matter could not be discussed broadly. Dr. Harrow had learned, through channels not entirely explained, that Mr. Sherlock Holmes was still alive, still private, and still capable of examining what official minds sometimes failed to see. Would he, in strict confidence, consider crossing the Atlantic? She added, in a hand that had clearly abandoned official polish for honest appeal, that the dead men had been good, that the living were frightened, and that if there was evil under the matter, it lay hidden among people who believed they were building the future. Holmes held out his hand for the letter, took it back, and read the last line once more. Then he rose, crossed to the window, and looked into the dusk where his hive stood in ordered shadow. "NASA," said he at last, pronouncing the letters with measured curiosity. "A new house built for old human ambitions. What a singular invitation. You intend to accept." He turned, and the old brightness, that dangerous and delightful brightness, had come fully into his face. "My dear Watson, when a woman of scientific training writes from the edge of the desert to say that a good man has died among rockets and frightened idealists, and when she sprinkles her plea with the dust of the proving ground itself, I do not see how I can refuse." The letter with red dust. We spent much of that evening over the letter and the brief cable that followed it not long after, as if the very act of reading had drawn another message over the ocean. Holmes, who never believed in coincidence where human intention might be involved, remarked that our answer was expected before it had been sent. This was America, he said, and perhaps also science. The cable stated that arrangements could be made for our travel at once. It referred to the deceased as Dr. Elias Mercer. Chief Advisor in Guidance Integrity at the Arroyo Experimental Station, a young NASA facility built partly from earlier military ground in New Mexico. The body had been discovered in his office before dawn by a janitor and later examined by a competent local physician who found no evidence of violence and attributed deaths to failure of the heart. Mercer, however, had not been known to neglect his health. He had spoken the previous evening to several colleagues of a matter of deep concern connected with an upcoming rocket test. His locked desk was found disturbed, though nothing official was admitted missing. Certain staff believed he had been under pressure. Security believed the trouble might concern espionage. Dr. Harrow believed it concerned conscience. That last sentence caught Holmes at once. "Security believes in enemies because it is paid to imagine them," said he. "Conscience is more expensive." I asked him if the matter did not seem too remote from our old sphere. He smiled in that rare way of his which suggested amusement, not only at me, but at the whole pride of specialized men. "My dear fellow," said he, "murder is not an invention of one age, nor are concealment, ambition, fear, loyalty, vanity, or love. Change the hansom for an airplane and the telegram for a coded line, and the heart of the affair remains. The human creature carries his motives into every century he enters. Or should the building of rockets improve him? We then considered the practical obstacles. Holmes was no longer a man to spring up and catch a train with a violin under his arm and a revolver in his pocket. Travel now required thought, rest, and accommodation to the plain truths of age. Yet if the years had narrowed his body, they had only refined his self-command. He moved through the necessary arrangements with quiet efficiency. Our passage would be by air from London, with proper rest in New York, and onward by rail, and then a smaller aircraft to the southwest. I suggested that a sea voyage might suit his nerves better, but he replied that the dead do not improve while one crosses the ocean at leisure. Late that night, while the fire fell low and the cottage seemed wrapped in the soft-breathing silence of the downs, Holmes asked me an unexpected question. "Do you ever think, Watson, that we have lived too long?" I was startled, for he rarely spoke so directly of age. "At times," said I, "but less often when I am with you." He gave a brief nod. There is an indecency in outlasting one's own century. One begins to feel like a footnote walking about in daylight. Then, after a pause, he added, "And yet I confess I should like to see the workshops in which men now prepare to leave the world." The remark moved me more than he knew. For all his irony, Holmes had always been susceptible to grandeur when it wore the clothes of exact labor. He cared little for empty speeches, but much for minds at work on something difficult and true. The thought of flight beyond the earth seemed to touch in him, that same deep chord which music and pure reasoning had long stirred. He was old, yes, but he was not finished with wonder. Before retiring, he spread the letter flat and examined with his lens certain grains caught in the gum near the fold. "Gypsum," said he softly, "a pale desert dust. There is also carbon soot and a minute trace of machine oil. She wrote this near engines. Observe the hand in the added line at the bottom. The pressure deepens." That was written after interruption or hesitation. Whatever she fears, it grew while she composed the page. "And what do you fear?" I asked. Holmes folded the letter carefully. "I fear a dead, honest man in a place where success has become too valuable. That is often enough." Across the wide Atlantic there is, I think, a special tenderness in any journey made late in life. Youth travels with appetite, age with memory. The stations, the platforms, the waiting rooms, the smell of luggage and polished wood, the murmur of strangers who are all carrying unseen histories of their own. These things take on a richness one scarcely noticed in earlier years. Holmes and I went up to London with little ceremony and less fuss than old adventures had once required. Yet I could not deny a stirring within me as we moved through the city. Baker Street, lay not far away in distance and impossibly far away in time. I saw in my mind the gas lamps, the familiar sitting room, the Persian slipper for tobacco, the chemical table, the dispatches pinned by jackknife to the mantel, and my friend younger by several worlds. Now we are going not toward Limehouse or the moors or some dark country house, but toward an airport and an ocean crossing into the age of rockets. Holmes bore the transition with a composure that was almost mischievous. At the airport, he observed travelers with open interest, as if each carried a diagram over the head. Air travel, said he, has granted the ordinary citizen an experience once reserved for emperors, birds, and lunatics. That alone is a revolution. The flight, though not brief, passed without incident. Holmes read little and slept not at all. He looked often through the small window where cloud banks shone like cold mountains and the sun laid silver roads across the upper world. Once, when the aircraft trembled lightly, I saw him close his eyes, not in fear, but in concentrated listening. Even now, he murmured, machinery speaks. One is only to learn the dialect. We stayed one night in New York, and I remember that city chiefly as a vast vertical murmur under electric light, impressive and somehow youthful even in its age. Holmes, who had no patience for urban boasting, nevertheless admitted that America seemed to build not merely outward but upward with a curious innocence of ambition, as if height were itself a moral good. The newspapers spoke of missiles, satellites, budgets, competition, and the Soviet Union in tones that mixed anxiety with pride. Everywhere there was the sense of a race already underway, though no one could say what shape the finish line might take. The word moon appeared in editorials not as romance, but as possibility. From New York, we continued westward. The train carried us to long reaches of land that seemed to unfold without limit, and I, who had seen a fair amount of the world by then, was still deeply struck by the scale of the American scene. Towns rose from plains and gave way to broader emptiness. Rivers passed like long thoughts. The evenings widened. The stars, when at last the land grew dry and open, appeared lower and more intimate than in England, as if the whole heaven had stooped a little nearer to listen. Holmes was unusually silent during that stage of the journey. At first I thought him weary. Later I understood that he was storing impressions, arranging them in that inner chamber of his where detail became order. Once he asked for the local papers and studied a small item concerning a test delay at a government range not far from our destination. Another time he watched a group of young engineers in the dining car and remarked that scientific men now carried themselves less like scholars and more like soldiers, though their battles were with mathematics and deadlines. War, said he, has taught industry to wear a uniform. Peace has not yet persuaded it to remove it. As the train approached the southwest, the land changed into something at once severe and beautiful. There were red distances, pale flats, sharp lines of rock, and a light so clean that every object seemed drawn with intention. By the time we reached the final airfield from which a smaller aircraft was to convey us nearer the Arroyo station, I felt as though we had come not only across an ocean, but across time itself. The air was dry enough to sharpen the breath. Mountains lay in blue secrecy on the far edge of the horizon. Men in khaki, engineers in rolled sleeves, secretaries with folders pressed against their chests, and military personnel in lingering transfer from older programs moved through the little terminal with practiced urgency. Dr. Lucille Harrell met us there. She was a tall woman in middle years, with dark hair pulled plainly back, a face marked more by intelligence than beauty, and the sort of self-command one associates with those who have had to be twice as good as the men around them in order to be heard half as often. She shook Holmes's hand with a grave directness that pleased him. When she turned to me, there was warmth in her manner, and I at once saw that whatever this business might prove to be, it had already weighed heavily upon her. "You have been kind to come," said she. "That will depend upon the result," Holmes replied. A shadow moved across her eyes. Then I hope you will be kind indeed. The drive to Arroyo Station took us along roads that cut through broad wastes of pale earth and scrub, with mountains standing at a distance like folded paper beneath the immense blue. There were long stretches in which no house appeared, only telephone poles, far fences, and the glimmer of heat. Holmes, who had spent enough years in England to think of landscape in terms of hedges and boundaries, regarded the openness with quiet absorption. A criminal, said he, would feel either free or terribly exposed here. Dr. Harrow sat beside the driver while Holmes and I occupied the rear. She began, in the plain tone of one used to reports, to describe the institution that had summoned us. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration was new, she said, and still in the act of becoming itself. It had inherited old military facilities, old rivalries, old habits of secrecy, and a sudden new mission so large that few quite knew how to speak of it without sounding foolish. Some wished to build scientific instruments. Some wished to build national prestige. Some wished simply not to lose to the Soviet Union. A few, she believed, truly wished to enlarge the human future. All these desires lived under one roof now, and not always peacefully. Arroyo Station, though smaller than the famous sites that appeared in the newspapers, was of real importance. Guidance systems were tested there, along with structural parts, telemetry instruments, and certain rocket assemblies too delicate or too dangerous for crowded public view. Engineers came and went from other centers. Mathematicians worked on problems of flight and stability. There were machine shops, drafting rooms, concrete test stands, laboratories, bunkers, offices, press areas for selected demonstrations, and farther out in the range, great reaches of land where engines could speak with their full, terrible voice. The place had grown very quickly. It had not yet had time to grow calm. And Dr. Mercer? I asked. At once her expression softened. He was one of the best men there, said she. Not the most celebrated, not the most political, but perhaps the most trusted. He had worked in guidance and instrumentation long before NASA existed. He understood systems, but he also understood people. Younger staff went to him when their calculations failed or when their courage did. He had a slow voice, a gentle way, and a habit of asking one more question than anyone wanted. It is possible that habit cost him his life. Holmes leaned slightly forward. You are convinced, then, that the death was not natural? I am convinced that it was not simple, said she. Whether the law would call it murder, I do not know. That is why you are here. She then described the morning on which Mercer had been found. He had stayed late in the guidance analysis building after an evening of meetings connected with a forthcoming demonstration test. A cleaner discovered him shortly before dawn, seated at his desk, head bent slightly, one hand near an open notebook, the other not far from a small silver pillbox. The room was in order, save for papers that looked as though they had been searched. The window had been opened. The night had cooled sharply. A cup stood half-finished near his elbow. The physician judged the death consistent with heart failure. Mercer had occasionally suffered mild angina, though he kept it quiet and managed it well. Yet several colleagues stated that he had been anxious about data irregularities and had intended to speak to the station director the next morning. A report he had been preparing could not be found. Security took charge. The official verdict was discouraging the ordinary. Dr. Harrow, who had known Mercer for years, did not believe in discouraging the ordinary explanations. Why not appeal to the police, I asked. We did, said she. They were respectful and understandably outmatched. Then security suggested it might be better handled within federal channels. The federal channels dislike uncertainty. The station director dislikes scandal. The military men smell sabotage. The younger staff smell fear. I wrote to you because Dr. Mercer once spoke of Sherlock Holmes as if he were discussing a theorem. He said that one clean mind can be of more use than a committee. I thought it only fair to test his opinion. Holmes's eyes, though half closed, had lost nothing. "And why, Dr. Harrow, did you not place more detail in your letter?" She gave a tired smile. "Because letters travel, because telephones are listened to, because some people at Arroyo think we are already under watch from Moscow, while others think that idea useful. Because I was not sure whom to trust, because I hoped your curiosity would accomplish the rest." "Excellent," said Holmes. "You have done very well." When at last the station appeared, it did so not as a single dramatic complex, but as a spread of low buildings, towers, shed service roads, fenced compounds, antennae, and distant structures lifting from the desert like pieces of industry laid out upon a drafting table. Heat quivered above the ground. Trucks moved in the distance. A tall test stand caught the sun and shone hard as bone. There was no romance in its first aspect, and yet the romance was there, hidden in purpose. Here, in this dry and unfinished place, men and women were teaching metal how to climb toward the stars. Dr. Elias Mercer, before Holmes would inspect the room of death, he wished to know the dead man as fully as possible. This was always his way. He held that facts about an event were useful, but facts about a human being were often decisive. "If a man dies unnaturally," said he, "the method matters. But the first question is always why that man, at that hour, in that particular circle of lives." We were therefore shown first to a modest guest office, where Mercer's personnel file, selected papers, and a few private effects had been assembled under Dr. Harrow's authority. The file told the bare career. Elias Mercer had been born in the American Midwest, educated in mathematics and engineering, drawn during the war into technical work on aircraft instruments, and later absorbed into the post-war research system from which the space program now rose. He had married young, been widowed too early, and afterward lived in a reserved but not lonely fashion, devoting himself to work and to his only child, a daughter named Anna. He was widely respected, little decorated, seldom quoted in the press, and often thanked in the private margins of other men's successes. There was, to my mind, something noble in the obscurity of such a life. Great enterprises are built less by famous figures than by patient men like Mercer, who take responsibility for details no audience will ever applaud. His desk photographs had also been preserved. In one, he stood beside a much younger Anna near a lake, both laughing against the wind. In another, he was at a long table crowded with instruments, his sleeves rolled, his face mild and intent. There was a third, more recent, of Mercer among a group of younger engineers outside a hangar-like building. Holmes studied this one with care. "He is central without wishing to be," said he. "Observe the posture of the others, half turned toward him, though the camera is elsewhere. A natural counselor." Dr. Harrow confirmed it. Mercer had no genius for self-advancement. He was not careless, but he lacked the vanity that thrives in new institutions. When the young argued, he listened. When management rushed, he slowed them by asking what would happen if a figure was wrong or a bolt weak or a pressure line delayed. "He was not against ambition," said she. "He only believed ambition should not bury truth." "And who disliked that?" asked Holmes. She hesitated. "No one would say so openly. Yet you must understand the mood. The country wanted progress. Congress wanted results. The newspapers wanted victories. Every delay looked like weakness. Every accident looked like national shame. People spoke of science, but what they often meant was pace. Mercer had become troubled by a set of guidance drift readings from an upper stage control package. Some said the data would settle after calibration. He was not satisfied. He believed the vibration in one part of the system might, under the right conditions, throw the guidance platform off by enough to ruin a test and perhaps kill men if ignored in a crude future. Holmes turned to her sharply, and this concern was recent, more urgent in the last week. He had asked for another review. He had quarreled quietly with the station director. He had also spoken to Miriam Sloan, our lead trajectory mathematician, and to Dr. Otto Reiner, who came from the propulsion side. There were technical overlaps. He intended, I think, to bring a full memorandum to Washington, which is now missing. Yes, Holmes folded his hands and closed his eyes for a moment. It was a habit of his when he wished to sift many threads at once without interruption from sight. A good man, a new institution, a deadline, concealed risk, absent report, and a death of the heart. Very pretty. There is nearly always a person in such matters who persuades himself that the cause is greater than the individual. They are among the most dangerous people in the world. I asked whether Mercer had enemies of a more personal sort. Harrow shook her head. No scandal attached to him. No debts of consequence. No known affairs. He was liked by clerks and technicians as well as by engineers. If there had been any private unhappiness, it lay buried in the ordinary sorrows of life rather than in the dramatic ones. Holmes observed that ordinary sorrows were often the deepest. At length, he rose and took up one of the dead man's pens from the tray where effects had been placed. He rolled it between thumb and forefinger, then set it down exactly where it had lain. "Watson," said he softly, "I should like very much to see the room. But before we go, note this. A man may be murdered for what he knows, for what he intends to say, or for what he intends to say, or for what he refuses to say. Mercer seems capable of all three. The room of quiet instruments, the guidance analysis building, was cooler than the sun-struck yard outside and quieter too. Its corridors held the peculiar hush of places where concentration lives. There were linoleum floors, metal frame doors, frosted glass panels, smell of paper and machine oil, and the faint electric hum common to modern workplaces. Yet the silence was not complete. Far away, one heard a typewriter, a rolling cart, the closing of a cabinet, the murmur of voices from an office where calculations were being argued over. Life went on. It always does, even after death has touched a building. Mercer's office had been sealed as far as internal procedure permitted, though not what the Reverend Holmes would have preferred. Security men, station physicians, administrators, and cleaners had all come through to some extent. Still, enough remained. The room was plain, almost austere. A desk, 2 chairs, shelves of binders, a filing cabinet, a drafting table folded down against the wall, and a window looking west over pale ground and distant mountains. On the desk stood the cup Dr. Harrow had mentioned, now preserved under a glass cover. Beside it lay the silver pillbox, a notebook, an ashtray with one spent match but no cigarette, several pencils and a blotter. Papers had been gathered and catalogued, yet the order of the room suggested that something more than ordinary work had taken place there in the hours before death. A drawer stood slightly askew. A cabinet key had been left in the lock. One chair had been pulled out farther than comfort required, as though a visitor had risen quickly or had leaned forward in agitation. Holmes moved about the room with the grave economy that age had brought to his methods. In younger days, he had sometimes flung himself into an examination with almost theatrical energy. Now he seemed to save each motion for the exact place it was needed. He bent over the desk and remained for some moments quite still. Then he looked at the window latch, the sill, the floor, the chairback, and finally the cup. He asked for blubs, received them, and lifted the pillbox. "Was this tested?" he inquired. Dr. Harrow said that the tablets had been looked at only in the most general way. The physician had taken them to be heart medication. Since the cause of death had been considered natural, no extensive toxicology had been ordered. Holmes gave so soft a sound that one might almost have mistaken it for a sigh. "Institutions," said he, "have an extraordinary ability to stop thinking the moment a comfortable phrase presents itself." He opened the pillbox. Within were several small, round, white tablets. He sniffed them, frowned, and then touched one lightly with the tip of a gloved finger. "Not what I expected," said he. I looked closer. You suspect poison. I suspect poison. I suspect substitution. Poison is often a dramatic word for a smaller act. Observe, Watson. The doctor tells us these are for angina. I know the usual smell and texture of such preparations. These have a sweetened coating and a trace of peppermint, more akin to digestive tablets than cardiac relief. They've also been placed in the box without the abrasion marks one would expect from Mercer's long habit of carrying it in a trouser pocket. They're too fresh, too clean, too serene. The effect upon Dr. Harrow was immediate and terrible. She sat down without speaking. Holmes, having delivered the blow, softened his tone. "We are not yet certain," said he, "but we are no longer dealing with mere chance." He next examined the cup. The residue had dried to a brown ring. Holmes asked what Mercer usually drank at work. Harrow answered that he was fond of coffee at first, and later in the evening of warm milk with a little cocoa, as acid troubled him if he took coffee too late. There was no sugar in his evening cup. Holmes nodded as if that detail confirmed something already forming in his mind. He looked at the spoon and then at the saucer beneath. "There has been sugar on this tray," said he, "but he took none," Harrow replied. "Precisely." He then turned to the notebook. Most pages contain figures, short notes, and hasty sketches of system drift. On the final open page, there were several lines in Mercer's neat hand, ending with a phrase that had trailed into uncertain strokes. It read, as far as we could make out, "Not thrust alone. Ask why was set by star table after the bench test." Beneath that came an unfinished mark as if the pen had paused. Holmes studied it long. "Star table?" I asked. "A calibration rig," said Harrow. "They use optical reference to align the guidance system before tests." Holmes touched the page lightly. Then our dead man was still thinking technically at the end. Either he had discovered the key or wished to leave one. There remained the window. It had been opened several inches. Outside on the sill lay fine pale dust and one faint scuff mark. The night of Mercer's death, Harrow told us, had turned cool after sunset. There was no reason for him to admit desert air at that hour, especially with papers on the desk. Holmes leaned close to the latch and smiled thinly. "The window was open from within," said he, "but by a person wearing gloves." He pointed to the minute smear on the metal, a dull trace rather than a clear print, and not for air, for effect. Someone wished to imply either restlessness or intrusion. Yet the dust tells against any true entry. No one came through here. It is theater. When at last he straightened himself, the room had changed in spirit. It was no longer the office of a man who had died sadly at his labors. It had become a stage on which someone had tried, clumsily but not altogether foolishly, to arrange a less troublesome truth. Tas. Faces in the corridor. Holmes always preferred to see people before they had been thoroughly prepared for him. The second interview, he used to say, belongs to their self-defense. The first belongs, if one is fortunate, to themselves. With Dr. Harrow's help, he therefore requested that certain members of the Arroyo staff meet him in informal succession that same afternoon, before word had spread too widely that the old Englishman had already found reason to distrust the official verdict. The first to come was Ruth Bell, Mercer's secretary and administrative assistant, a capable woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the composed fatigue of those upon whom offices silently depend. She had worked with Mercer for 6 years and spoke of him with an affection nearly maternal, though she was younger by some margin. He had been absent-minded in practical matters, she said, but exact in judgment. He thanked people. He remembered birthdays. He did not raise his voice. On the last evening she had seen him, he remained at his desk after most had gone, waiting for a file from guidance mathematics and another from test operations. He seemed worried, but not frightened. More sorrowful than scared, she said. like a man who had hoped to be wrong and found out he wasn't. "Did he receive visitors?" asked Holmes. "Yes, sir. Miss Sloane went in around us. Then Dr. Reiner for a short while. Later, Mr. Voss sent word he was tied up and would see Dr. Mercer in the morning. After that, I cannot be sure. I left a little after 8. Had Dr. Mercer enemies?" She looked almost offended by the word. "Not enemies, sir, but there were people who disliked being slowed down. He could slow things down if he thought he had to." Holmes asked about the pillbox. Ruth Bell said Mercer kept it on him, not on the desk, and used it only when pain came on after strain. She had once brought him water for it. He was private about such things, said she. But I noticed enough to know. Next came Major Calvinhurst, security chief, a square-shouldered man of military manner whose suspicion entered the room before him. He was polite but clearly unconvinced of the value of outside assistance. To his mind, the range of possibilities narrowed at once to foreign intelligence, disgruntled labor, or internal breach of classified procedure. He had little patience for emotional interpretations. Mercer had, he said, been a good technician, but perhaps insufficiently aware of larger strategic realities. The nation was under challenge. Delays and doubts could be exploited. Hearst believed that missing papers and a disturbed desk strongly suggested espionage. Holmes listened with remarkable patience. "Tell me, Major," said he at last, "if a Soviet agent wished to obtain sensitive material, would he open a window in a dry country and leave a theatrical scene behind him?" Hearst stiffened. "You're assuming." "I assume nothing. I infer sloppiness where you infer Moscow. They are not the same thing." The Major colored slightly, yet he answered the next questions with more care. Mercer had indeed requested additional security for certain files, though not specifically because of foreign threats. There had been pressure from Washington for a successful demonstration test in a matter of days. Hearst admitted, under Holmes's mild persistence, that some data irregularities had led to tense conversations. He also admitted that Mercer had seemed dissatisfied with the official response. Dr. Otto Reiner followed. He was a German engineer of middle years, with a broad, intelligent face, weary eyes, and hands that looked almost too gentle for heavy machinery. His accent was marked but clear. One saw at once that this was a man carrying an older history on his back. In another age, he might have been judged only by his science. In this one, he was judged also by where he had been born and by what armies had once claimed his work. He spoke of Mercer with plain respect. They had argued often, he said, because propulsion men and guidance men are married by necessity and separated by temperament. Yet their arguments were honest. On the last evening, Mercer had asked him whether a vibration problem in the upper assembly could be worsened by a certain fuel flow resonance. Reiner had answered that under some test conditions it could. Mercer then said, "If they are forcing this through, someone must stop them." "Who are they?" Holmes asked. Reiner spread his hands. "Management. The machine. Time. In such places they is often everyone and no one." There was sadness in the man, and Holmes, who could be severe with vanity but often kind to Burton, treated him gently. When Reiner rose to leave, Holmes asked one final question. Did Mercer fear for himself? Reiner thought a moment. No, that was not his weakness. He feared being too late. The loss of that first afternoon's interviews was Miriam Sloane. She was younger than I had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with a narrow, serious face, intelligent gray eyes, and the air of one who had been living too long on coffee, duty, and insufficient sleep. Chalk dust marked one sleeve of her cardigan. Her fingers bore the graphite stain common to those who work constantly with pencils and calculations. She answered promptly, sometimes too promptly, and gave the impression of holding herself together by force of will. Mercer had consulted her about drift figures, yes. She had believed the anomalies manageable. The guidance platform was sensitive, the system knew, and data from test benches did not always predict full flight behavior exactly. She had recommended revised alignment procedures using star table references. Mercer thought the correction insufficient. Their disagreement had remained professional. No, she had not seen him after early evening. No, she did not know of any missing report. Yes, she knew he carried heart medication. No, she had no idea why anyone would tamper with it. Holmes thanked her and asked, as though idly, "You favor peppermint tablets for the stomach, Miss Sloane?" She looked up quickly. "Everyone around here does. The coffee is awful." Indeed. She smiled, but it was a smile that came late and left too fast. When she had gone, Holmes remained quiet for some time. "Well," I said. He glanced toward a door through which she had passed. "An admirable mind," said he, "and a mind under intolerable pressure. We shall tread carefully." Chalkboards and long shadows. The next morning, Dr. Harrow conducted us through the areas where Mercer had spent much of his working life. If the desert outside was broad and almost empty, the inner world of the station was full of marks made by thought. Chalkboards stood covered with equations like weather maps of intention. Drafting tables held sheets marked with clean lines and circles, delicate as lace. In one laboratory, gyros were mounted in frames that turned with eerie smoothness, as if rehearsing balance in a world not yet reached. Wires, oscilloscopes, metal casings, benches, calibration rigs, and the careful hands of technicians created an atmosphere unlike any Holmes had known in the crime rooms of London, and yet deeply familiar in one respect. It was a place of signs. He had always lived by signs. He walked more slowly than of old, but no slower than his understanding required. When a young technician explained, at Harrow's request, how the guidance package was aligned by references on a star table, Holmes listened with real attention. The man, encouraged, described the simple principle beneath a frightening cloud of terms. One establishes a known orientation on the ground. One measures how the instrument believes it is pointed, and one corrects the difference. If vibration, heat, mounting strain, or timing error changes that relationship, then a rocket may think itself elsewhere than it truly is. It is a terrible thing in its way for a machine to be mistaken about where it stands. Holmes nodded. "Much like a statesman," said he. The technician laughed before remembering whom he addressed. Holmes then asked, in a tone of genuine curiosity, which errors are small enough to ignore and which become dangerous. The answer, as it often is in medicine and in crime, depended upon accumulation. A tiny drift might matter little at first and much later. A repeated small wrongness could become a large failure far from its point of origin. Holmes turned that over in silence, and I knew he was hearing in it not only science but morality. In the mathematics section, we found Miriam Sloane at a blackboard with two younger women and a young man, all of them in shirt sleeves despite the cooling machine overhead. Their work stopped when we entered, but the atmosphere of effort remained. Holmes examined the board and asked Sloane with surprising courtesy whether she would explain the portion dealing with cumulative error. She did so with admirable clarity. A launch, she said, is a chain of promises. One angle, one time signal, one correction must trust the next. If one promise is false, the later ones may keep faith with a lie. That is extremely well put, Holmes observed. And it seems to me that your late colleague understood it in more than a mathematical sense. A shadow crossed her face. He understood too much, perhaps, about the system, or about the people in it. She did not answer directly. Instead, she turned to a stack of worksheets and selected one. It showed columns of figures, some erased and re-entered. Holmes asked permission to examine them. He noted dates, initials, and revision marks. These were amended after the bench test? He asked. Yes. At Dr. Mercer's request? At mine. Why? Because the original alignment correction produced a drift I did not trust. You improved it, I believe so. Believed, said Holmes softly, is a dangerous verb in engineering. She held his gaze. It is the only verb anyone has before a test. The exchange rather sharpened, but Harrow intervened by suggesting we see the calibration room itself. On the way out, Holmes paused beside Sloane's desk. There lay a packet of peppermint tablets, half used, and a pencil sharpened with a clean, decisive knife stroke of habit, he noticed, I'm sure. The small silver nick on the desk edge where someone with restless fingers had repeatedly tacked metal against it. Whether that metal were the compass, a spoon, or a pillbox, I could not then say. Later, when we were alone, I asked him his view. Miss Sloane is no fool, said he. She is accurate, frightened, and carrying a burden. Whether it is guilt or merely responsibility remains to be seen. The great vice of institutions such as this is that they teach conscientious people to call their fear prudence. In the desert range, on our second evening at Arroyo, Holmes expressed a wish to see the outer range where tests were conducted. Dr. Harrow arranged a drive at dusk, and we traveled with a small party composed of a range officer, a mechanic, and Dr. Reiner, whose duties took him there in any case. It was one of the most memorable excursions of my life. The road ran past fenced compounds and low blockhouses, then into greater openness where towers rose solitary against the falling light. The desert, which at noon had seemed harsh, became under evening a place of extraordinary gentleness. The colors softened into rose, ash, and violet. Long shadows pooled in the hollows. The air cooled. Above us the first stars opened, faint at first and then steady, as if the sky itself were turning on its lights one by one to inspect what men below had built in ambition and hope. At the main test stand, a rocket engine assembly sat inert in its frame, all pipes, braces, valves, and dark promise. Even in stillness, it possessed latent violence. Reiner explained the fuel lines and the purpose of the firing sequence, in language simple enough for me and exact enough for Holmes. Men checked gauges, tightened couplings, passed clipboards hand to hand. There was no glamour in their labor, only attention. I recall that Holmes, standing with his thin hands folded behind him, watched these preparations much as he might once have watched a gang of dock laborers or a company of soldiers, except that here the enemy was error itself. When the brief test firing came at last, it did not last long. Yet its impression was profound. A warning sounded. Men withdrew to safer positions, and then from the engine there burst a controlled fury of flame and sound so great that the body felt it before the mind understood it. The desert answered in echoes. Heat trembled in waves. The engine did not speak like any earthly thing I had heard. It did not roar so much as declare. And then it ceased. In the silence after, the stars above seemed brighter for having witnessed it. Holmes was quiet for a time after the firing. As we drove back beneath a sky of astonishing clarity, he said at last, "There is something almost religious in it. Not the noise, but the collective act. So many minds brought together to persuade a machine to rise. No wonder some men will sacrifice too much for it." Dr. Reiner, seated across from us, gave a slow nod. "Yes, that is the danger. A dream with fire under it can burn all kinds of scruple away." He then spoke, with a frankness that surprised me, of the unease many carried from the war into these new efforts. Some had built weapons before they built instruments of exploration. Some had been judged, pardoned, transferred, or quietly employed because the knowledge in their heads was too valuable to discard. America wanted victory in science, but science did not arrive free of history. Mercer, said Reiner, understood this better than most. He believed that the only way to build a clean future was to look directly at the dirty past and refuse its habits. "He told me once," said Reiner, looking out toward the faint lights at the station, "that if we carry deceit upward, it will still be deceit when it reaches the sky." Holmes glanced at him. "And what did you answer?" I said he was idealistic. "And now?" Reiner's voice became very quiet, No, I think he was practical. That night, back in my room, I found sleep slow to come. The desert was still. Somewhere in the distance, machinery thudded and ceased. I thought of Mercer alone in his office of young people working late over figures that might one day guide a living man beyond the air, and of Holmes old and indomitable, moving among them like a witness from another age come to ask whether progress had yet learned honesty. The mystery itself lay unresolved, but already the case had widened in my mind beyond crime, and had become a question about what sort of future human beings deserve. Anna Mercer. The dead speak through objects, but they speak also through those who love them. Holmes therefore asked to meet Anna Mercer, who had come to Arroyo after her father's death, and was staying in station lodgings until his affairs could be settled. She received us the following day in a small sitting room whose government furniture had been softened by the mere presence of grief. She was a woman in her late 20s, perhaps early 30s, composed in the way the bereaved often are when they have spent themselves before strangers arrive. Her father's photographs had prepared me to see his smile in her face, and indeed some likeness was there, though her expression was quicker, more searching. Holmes treated her with a gentleness that might have astonished readers who know him only from his severer public moments. He did not press at once into questions. He asked after her journey, her memories of the station, the last letter she had received from her father. Only gradually did he turn toward the matter itself. She answered plainly, her father had written often a work, but always more about people than machines. He mentioned Miriam Sloane with admiration and concern, saying she was brilliant and too hard on herself. He spoke warmly of Dr. Reiner, whom others mistrusted too readily. He complained mildly of administrative pressure, especially from Director Leland Voss, a man more attentive to schedules and visitors from Washington than to the private hesitations of careful engineers. Did he seem afraid? Holmes asked. Anna thought a long moment. Not for himself. He sounded tired. There was something in the last letter that troubled me then and troubles me more now. She rose, went to a handbag, and drew out the sheet. He wrote, "There are times when a program gathers such speed that no one wishes to be the person who says stop. Yet sometimes the only honest thing a man can do is place his hand on the rail and feel the heat for what it is. That was my father. He liked images. He was trying to tell me something without saying it outright." Holmes read the letter with care. His eye lingered on a postscript. He mentions chest pain here. Yes. He brushed it aside. He always did. Does he ever carry peppermint stomach tablets? She looked surprised. All the time. Since I was a girl. He said the coffee of modern civilization required them. Holmes handed the letter back. In what sort of container? A little paper roll, usually in his coat pocket. Why? He glanced at me and then answered with measured calm. Because his silver pillbox at death contained tablets that may have been for the stomach rather than the heart. A change came over her face, not dramatic but deep and painful. Her father's private frailty, the one ordinary weak point in a man otherwise so dependable, had become in that instant something vulnerable to another human hand. She did not weep. She only sat down more slowly than before. I thought so, she said after a long pause. You thought what? That he had not simply died. When I told me it was his heart, I believed it might be true, but not whole. He knew his body. He was careful. He once said that if he ever died suddenly at work, I was to ask whether he had been prevented from finishing something. Holmes's eyes sharpened. When did he say that? Months ago, after a quarrel with Mr. Voss. I thought it was only his way of speaking. She then gave us a detail of real importance. Her father had been in the habit, when deeply troubled, of writing one private note in a small dark notebook he kept apart from official files. He called it his weather book. It contained not weather but moral weather, she explained, the kind that gathers around institutions and people. He would write impressions rather than facts, because impressions were sometimes what facts later failed to capture. The notebook had not been among his effects. Holmes leaned forward. Would he have hidden it? Not hidden. Put aside. Somewhere no clerk would file it by mistake. Where? Anna considered. He liked the false bottom of ordinary things. Old men do. He once kept letters inside a bird guide. This image of the dead engineer, practical and gentle, hiding his conscience within harmless objects, affected me strangely. Holmes asked whether Mercer had friends close enough to know such habits. Anna named Dr. Harrod once. After a hesitation, she named also Ruth Bell. Then, more reluctantly, Miriam Sloane. He was very proud of her, she said. Prouder than she knew. Perhaps that made things harder if they disagreed. When the interview ended, Holmes rose and bowed slightly, a gesture from another age that seemed wholly appropriate. At the door, Anna said, Mr. Prouder, Holmes, if you find that someone did this because my father would not keep silent, please do not let them turn him into a problem of paperwork. He deserves better. Holmes's answer was grave. My dear madam, if I can help it, your father shall remain what he was, a man. Old wars and new rooms. Director Leyland Voss received us that afternoon in an office whose careful order and selected photographs suggested a man deeply aware of appearances. He was handsome in the polished American way, perhaps not yet 50, with dark hair, a cultivated voice, and the practiced courtesy of one who had spent enough time in committees to know the price of looking irritated. Behind him on the wall hung images of test successes, visiting officials, and one framed newspaper front page celebrating a recent national advance in rocketry. To a casual visitor, he might have seemed the very picture of modern administrative confidence. Holmes, who was never a casual visitor, sat across from him and regarded him as he might have regarded a locked dispatch box whose key had been mislaid. Voss expressed sorrow at Mercer's death, concern for morale, and appreciation for the discreet assistance of distinguished guests. Each phrase was well chosen. Holmes let them all pass, then asked if Mercer had tried to delay the coming test. He raised technical concerns, said Voss. That is not unusual. Were they justified? We believe them resolvable. We, the relevant teams, which included Miss Sloane. Yes. And excluded Dr. Mercer's judgment? Yes. And excluded Dr. Mercer's judgment? Voss's smile thinned. Mr. Holmes, no program can function if every disagreement becomes a halt order. We must balance caution with progress. Holmes's own voice remained very mild. And how often does that balance require a man's heart medication to be replaced with digestive tablets? For the first time, Voss lost command of his face. It was only a flicker, but enough. I beg your pardon. You heard me. The director recovered with effort. He denied any knowledge of such tampering and suggested that if true, it would support his long-standing fear of hostile interference. Holmes did not challenge the point directly. Instead, he asked about station procedures, access to Mercer's office, and the missing memorandum. Voss admitted that Mercer had requested a meeting and had spoken strongly about vibration effects on alignment. He admitted also that pressure from Washington existed, though he objected to the implication that such pressure could influence technical judgment. Holmes observed dryly that men are very often influenced precisely when they object to the idea. Afterward, in the corridor, Dr. Harrell exhaled as though she had been holding her breath throughout. He will make this into espionage if it protects the schedule, she said. Perhaps, Holmes replied, but he is not our hand. He's only the weather. Later that day, we visited a storage room where Mercer's books and loose effects had been boxed. Holmes had not forgotten Anna's mention of the hidden notebook. He went through the volumes with a patience that might have seemed excessive had I known how often the smallest private habit opens the largest locked door. There were engineering texts, astronomy guides, poetry, a field manual for desert plants, and one much-used bird book with a spine more worn than the rest. Holmes shook it gently. Nothing fell. He riffled the pages. At last, his finger paused near the back cover. Between the final leaves and the pasted board, there lay a slim, dark notebook. Dr. Harrow gave a low sound of distress. His weather book. Holmes opened it. The entries were brief, often cryptic, yet deeply revealing. Mercer had written of morale, of design uncertainty, of the corrosive effect of haste, and of his fear that honest objections were being transformed into disloyalty by administrative language. One entry mentioned Sloane with admiration for her mind and alarm for her exhaustion. Another referred to Voss as a man who mistakes momentum for truth. There was also mention of Reiner, described as guilty of history but not, I think, of present deceit. The final completed entry, written 2 days before death, was the most striking. It read, MS altered correction again. Says star table reset will cover resonance. I fear she is defending not result but prior choice. LV wants clean demonstration. If I do not go above station level tomorrow, I become part of the lie. Holmes closed the notebook very softly. For some moments, no one spoke. Miss Sloane, I said at last. Perhaps, said Holmes, or perhaps only the most visible surface of the difficulty. Do not rush, Watson. A tired conscience leaves many kinds of footprints. Yet I saw that he was deeply moved, not by the case alone, but by the notebook's tone. Mercer had not written like a bureaucrat or a martyr. He had written like a man trying to remain decent in a structure that rewarded smoothness over truth. Holmes slipped the notebook into an inner pocket. This, said he, is not merely evidence, it is a moral map. Tom Purcell's trail of espionage. That evening, the station shifted in mood. Word spread, as such things will, that the English detective had found cause to doubt the official account. Major Hurst responded in the most predictable manner by increasing his agitation about spies. An internal memorandum was circulated. Certain offices were rechecked. Men lowered their voices when we passed. Young scientists who had already been carrying too much strain now carried suspense as well. Holmes, who despised disturbances that clouded observation, retreated for several hours into quiet thought and allowed the station's own nervousness to expose itself. It exposed quite a good deal. A technician attempted to tell us in confidence that a stranger had been seen near Building C on the night of Mercer's death. The description altered twice while he gave it. A clerk whispered that classified files had gone missing for weeks, though it proved the files had merely changed departments under poor recording. A junior engineer hinted darkly about Dr. Reiner's wartime past and his access to vibration data, only to admit that he had no evidence beyond instinct. Holmes listened without contempt, but with little interest. Panic, said he to me later, is the great factory of irrelevant detail. Nevertheless, he did not ignore the possibility of deliberate misdirection. He revisited Major Erst and asked for a timeline of all personnel movements on the evening in question. The Major, perhaps chastened by Holmes's earlier certainty, complied. It was from this dry sheet that one useful point emerged. Miriam Sloane had not, in fact, left when she first implied. Her badge had registered at the mathematics section, then near the infirmary corridor, and later again near guidance analysis. The times did not prove criminality, but they contradicted her easy account. Holmes asked also whether the station infirmary stored common digestive tablets in bulk. It did. Did staff sometimes help themselves? They did. Had any shortage been noticed? No. Such tablets were not Inventroid-like controlled drugs. Hurst, seeing where this might lead, pressed once more the theory that an enemy agent had tampered with Mercer's pills and stolen his report. Holmes answered with a kind of pitying patience. My dear Major, If a foreign service possessed an operative capable of entering a secure American rocket station, identifying the exact man whose conscience threatened a test schedule, understanding his private medical habits, exchanging his medication in a way that required intimate knowledge, and then staging the scene with all the subtlety of a melodrama, I should say, your security problem lay deeper than espionage. Later we learned that Director Voss had already been drafting language to describe Morse's death publicly as a regrettable natural loss and made ongoing successful preparations. Holmes was informed of this. Chapter of the Quiet Red Light. It is one thing to solve a crime in the heart of London, where the fog gathers kindly around the lamps and every stone seems to remember the tread of old feet. But it is another thing entirely to sit in a room at the edge of a young space center in America where the walls are bright, the wires hum softly, and a single red light above a locked laboratory door seems to hold in its glow the fear of a new age. I have often written of my friend Sherlock Holmes as a man who seemed to stand apart from time itself, as if he had one foot in the old world of reason and the other in some thin and shining future where facts ran faster than trains and truth hid inside machines. But never had I seen that strange double nature in him more clearly than on the night when the red warding lamp burned above Laboratory 7 and the first murder at that great new national agency seemed to place not one life, but the hope of many lives beneath a shadow. Holmes stood with his hands behind his back and his lean head bent very slightly, while around us the young men and women of NASA moved with the frightened care of people who wish not to disturb either a crime scene or a dream. The dead man had already been carried away, but his absence had left a form behind more powerful than a body, and that form was made of silence locked drawers, a coffee cup with a pale ring at its bottom, a scratched watch, face a torn strip of graph paper, and one impossible thing which had drawn Holmes into that deep inward state which told me he had at last found the door to the true mystery. That impossible thing was very small, very plain, and very easy to miss. It was a smear of fine gray dust upon the inner handle of a door that, according to every witness, had not been opened from inside after the alarm had sounded. Elias Mercer, whose death had already shaken the center with the force of an explosion, had been a quiet man, a careful engineer, and by all reports a person too useful and too mild to attract the kind of hatred that ends in murder. Yet he had been found collapsed beside his drafting table shortly after dusk with a head wound first thought to be the cause of death, though Holmes had told me within moments that the blow had likely come after the fatal act and was meant not to kill, but to guide the eyes of fools. Holmes had then knelt, examined the man's cuffs, fingertips, and trouser knees, and afterward drifted in that strange, unhurried way of his through the laboratory, as if he were not searching for facts, but allowing facts to gather around him like iron filings around a magnet. Now, in the midnight hush, with the center far quieter than it had any right to be, he turned and looked at me with the grave brightness I knew so well. It was a look that came when an idea had taken hold of him, not as a certainty, but as a living creature that needed feeding. "Watson," said he very softly, "our dead gentleman was not the keeper of the secret. He was its last honest witness." The words touched me with a chill that had little to do with the cool American air pressing faintly through the sealed window frames. I had come with Holmes to this strange and rising world of rockets and radar, believing that the case before us would be an unusual but finite affair, one more knot for that remarkable brain to untie. Yet from the moment we had entered the center and seen how youth and worry lived side by side in every corridor, I had begun to feel that we had not merely crossed the sea. We had crossed an age. Here were the children of war trying to build the tools of peace, though the memory of battle still lay upon every drawing board. Here were men who spoke of orbits, launch windows, telemetry, and fuel mixtures in the same plain voices with which grocers in Kensington might discuss apples and flour. Here were women whose eyes carried that rare bright look of the truly gifted, for they were doing not one thing but two at once, They were solving the hard math of machines and proving every day to doubters that their minds had a place in this new kingdom of steel and fire. Over all of it lay the quiet pressure of the Cold War, a pressure not always named, but always felt, as if the whole nation lived with an unseen clock ticking beside its ear. In such a place, murder could not remain a private wound for long. It became immediately a question of sabotage, loyalty, secrecy, and national fear. Holmes knew this, and I knew that he knew it, which made his calm all the more remarkable. He asked that we be left alone in Laboratory 7 for a few minutes more. Our host, Administrator Nathaniel Harrow, agreed with obvious reluctance. Harrow was not a cruel man, or even an unkind one, but he bore the exhausted face of a person who has discovered too late that leadership is not a chair, but a weight. His hair, once dark, had turned almost silver at the temples, though he was not yet an old man. The founding of the agency had asked everything of him, and the murder of Mercer seemed likely to ask the rest. When he closed the door behind him, Holmes moved at once to the steel waste bin beside Mercer's desk and lifted from it several curled strips of paper, which another man might have dismissed as no more than failed calculations. He smoothed them upon the table, arranged them, then took from his pocket a small magnifying lens. I observed without speaking, for I have never known a more certain way to become useless to Sherlock Holmes than by interrupting him at such a time. Presently he gave a little hum, that private note which served him in place of exclamation. "How very touching," said he. "The dead man was trying to do a brave thing with clumsy tools. He showed me the strips. They were parts of a graph, or rather of several graphs, drawn by hand in pencil over printed axes. At first the marks meant nothing to me. Then I saw that the curves had been darkened and rubbed out again in places, as if Mercer had been trying to compare one mind to another while hiding the work from any chance observer." Holmes tapped one section with his fingernail. "This is no design sketch and no ordinary calculation. It is a comparison of measurements. More than that, it is a comparison Mercer did not trust anyone else to see. He destroyed it in haste, but not before the pattern fixed itself in his mind." He turned to the broad console lining the wall, where dials and meters sat dark and quiet now. He was looking not at what the machines were supposed to report, but at what they truly reported. That was the first hour in which Holmes began to move the matter away from personal hatred and toward deception on a larger scale, though he was careful, even then, not to say too much. He had long maintained that the early naming of theories is a common disease of weaker thinkers. Once a man has given a mystery a name, he begins to defend the name rather than question the mystery. Holmes would sooner hold 10 half-formed ideas than one proud mistake. We left the laboratory shortly afterward and walked with Harrow to a narrow conference room overlooking a moonlit strip of concrete where test vehicles stood sleeping in the dark. There, Holmes requested personnel files, shift schedules, maintenance logs, and internal memos linked to Mercer's division over the past fortnight. Harrow, though weary, complied. He was by then convinced, I think, that Holmes alone possessed the coolness needed for the business. Also present was Miss Evelyn Shaw, an analyst whose composure had impressed me from the first. She had the kind of steady gaze that did not challenge one but made all exaggeration feel childish. It was she who quietly placed a file before Holmes and said that Dr. Mercer had recently requested access to archive test data outside his usual duties. Holmes's eyes sharpened. And was that request granted? She answered that it had been delayed, then partly approved, then reviewed again after Mercer complained of inconsistencies in engine vibration figures from 2 separate test streams. The room became very still. Even Harrow, who was no engineer, understood at once the shape of danger in such a statement. Inconsistencies in figures might mean poor handling, fatigue, or innocent error, but they might also mean tampering. In those early days, when every launch was a fragile ladder built over a gulf of public pressure and political rivalry, bad data could be as deadly as a bomb. Holmes asked who had seen Mercer after his complaint. Miss Shaw named several colleagues, among them Dr. Howard Pike, Senior Propulsion Specialist, a man of great reputation and equally great impatience, Calvin Reed, a security liaison with military habits and a clipped voice, Ruth Alvarez, a brilliant young mathematician whose models supported flight stability predictions, and Thomas Bell Mercer's assistant, eager, pale, and so visibly shaken that I had feared for his health when first we met him. Holmes listened with closed eyes, only once interrupting to ask whether Mercer had spoken of fear. Miss Shaw said no. She paused, then added that he had spoken of disappointment. This seemed to strike Holmes more sharply than any mention of fear would have done. He opened his eyes and fixed them upon her. Disappointment in whom? Miss Shaw answered after a silence that it was hard to say. Mercer had only remarked, very quietly, that the saddest form of failure was not a failed engine, but a man who lies to his own work. That night, after we had retired to the small guest quarters provided for us, Holmes did not sleep. I know this because I, whose own faculties had been numbed by fatigue, awoke some time before dawn and saw the glow of his lamp at the far side of the room. He sat in a chair by the window, knees drawn up, papers spread around him like fallen leaves. Outside, the Florida darkness had softened toward morning. Palm fronds moved against a paling sky, and from somewhere distant came the low thunder of the sea. The sight of Holmes there, thin and still against that foreign light, filled me with a feeling I find difficult to name even now. He seemed at once deeply old and curiously young. The old part of him belonged to Baker Street, to tobacco ash, to violin strings trembling at midnight, to handsome wheels whispering over wet stones. The young part belonged to inquiry itself, to that part of the mind that never accepts a wall as the end of a road. The world had changed around him, but the flame in him was unchanged. Perhaps that is why men such as he endure in memory. They do not resist the future. They force the future to confess. When morning came, Holmes asked for coffee, not breakfast, and spent the first hour in interviews. He began, to my surprise, not with the proud and important men, but with clerks, cleaners, junior technicians, and the women in the data office who handled more paper in a day than many scientists handled in a month. I had seen him take this route often in England, and yet it still amazed me how much of a grand matter rests at last upon unnoticed hands. One woman remembered Mercer requesting a duplicate set of punch cards that had already been logged as filed. Another recalled that Bell, the assistant, had carried sealed envelopes between buildings at hours when no such errands were common. A night cleaner mentioned smelling pipe smoke near Laboratory 7, even though Mercer did not smoke and smoking was forbidden there. A junior technician reported that Dr. Bell, Pike had quarreled with Mercer 3 days before the death, though the exchange had been quiet rather than loud, which in some ways made it more troubling. Holmes gathered these small facts as a child gathers shells, with patience, and laid them side by side until a shoreline began to appear. It was in the late morning that he asked to inspect the archive building. The place was less glamorous than the test stands and launch models that so captured the public imagination, but to Holmes it was plainly of greater importance. Dreams, said he to me as we walked its cool aisles, are built in one room and defended in another. We have seen the room of dreams. Now let us see the room where truth is made to sit quietly on shelves. The archive held charts, reports, tapes, card trays, early computer printouts, calibration records, and engineering notebooks in such number that I felt overwhelmed. Holmes did not. He asked only for a particular group of engine vibration reports, internal review copies, and correction notices. When at last the boxes were brought, he settled himself at a long table under a humming lamp and became so absorbed that several hours passed in complete silence save for the turning of pages and the distant clatter of cards. I confess that I was near sleep when he suddenly straightened and pulled one sheet free. The page was a correction notice, routine in form, dull in appearance, and almost invisible among its fellows. Yet Holmes had found in it some jewel of consequence. He handed it to me. At first I saw nothing. Then my medical training, such as it was, lent me a small advantage in visual observation. The ink on the signature line differed very slightly from the ink in the body of the form. Holmes nodded. Precisely. The correction may be valid, but the approval was added later or replaced. Observe also the pressure marks. The sheet beneath was not aligned at the same angle. These were not signed together. He requested the surrounding documents, and within minutes had uncovered 3 more in which amendment approvals appeared to have been altered after filing, or were connected with data from Mercer's division. All bore signatures from officials who, according to the archive timestamps, had been elsewhere at the time. A false record, if proven, meant conspiracy. A conspiracy in such a place meant either fear or ambition, and Holmes had never accepted the easy choice between them. "We have moved," he said quietly, "from one dead man to several living liars." Chapter of the assistant who trembled Thomas Bell came to us in the afternoon, though in truth it was Holmes, who had arranged for Bell to come without ever clearly asking him. My friend had a way of creating the conditions in which a man's own unrest drew him forward. Bell entered the interview room with the look of one who has not slept in many nights. He was young, perhaps not yet 30, with a sort of face that could have seemed cheerful under other stars, but was now pinched by dread. His hands, I noticed, were clean in the almost painful way of a man who has washed them too often. Holmes treated him kindly. This, too, is a fact not always remembered by readers who know only the dramatic cuts of his logic. He could be icy when needed, but gentleness was one of the tools in his case, and he used it neither falsely nor poorly. He began not with accusation, but with admiration. He spoke of Bell's promising work, of Mercer's trust in him, of the pressure placed upon young men in great institutions. Bell's shoulders loosened very slightly. A few harmless questions followed. Then Holmes asked in the same tone why Bell had visited the data office at an hour when his division had already closed. The young man froze. His lips parted, but no answer came. Holmes waited. He did not press. There are moments when silence is not empty but fertile, and he knew them well. Bell at last said that Mercer had asked him to retrieve old materials. Holmes asked why this had not been formally logged. Bell replied that Mercer feared his request would be blocked again. Holmes asked whether Bell had found what Mercer sought. Bell said yes, though not all of it. Holmes asked who knew. Bell whispered that Dr. Pike had guessed. When Holmes gently inquired how Pike had guessed, Bell's eyes filled, and he said that there were very few private acts left inside NASA. The words hung in the room like a curtain drawn over a window. Holmes leaned forward. "Mr. Bell," said he, "your superior is dead. If you loved him, honesty is now your one remaining service. If you did not love him, honesty is still your one protection." Bell lowered his head and confessed that Mercer had believed certain test results were being cleaned before submission, not for beauty of presentation, but to hide oscillation risks in a propulsion model tied to an upcoming program review. The changes were small enough to pass unnoticed by the untrained eye and large enough, if repeated, to carry mortal consequences in later design decisions. At this, Bill began to shake badly. I moved to pour him water. He thanked me with a glance that seemed almost childlike in its misery. Holmes asked the next question with great care. Did Mercer name the person responsible? Bell answered that Mercer had only said the falsification must have entered through a chain, not a single hand. There were approvals, transfers, and reproductions. One man might start it, another might excuse it, a third might sign it to preserve a schedule. Holmes nodded. Very good. And on the day of his death, Bell swallowed. Mercer had told him that morning that he would meet someone after hours in Laboratory 7 and force a private reckoning before going to Harrow. Bell had begged him not to meet alone. Mercer had smiled and said that decency, properly offered, still deserved one chance. There was a sadness in Bell's voice as he repeated those words, as if he understood too late what mercy can cost. Holmes asked whether Mercer expected danger. Bell said no, not danger, only confession. It is strange how often the best of men misjudge evil by measuring it against themselves. A generous soul imagines that shame must work in another soul as it works in his own. Mercer, if Bell spoke true, believed that exposure in private might call forth repentance. He did not account for the cold variety of ambition that sees truth not as a mirror, but as a threat. Holmes afterward remarked to me that many crimes began not in hatred, but in the refusal to fall. Once a man has built his pride upon a lie, he may kill not because the truth is powerful, but because he cannot bear to be small. It is perhaps a bleak thought for a bedtime tale, and yet there was comfort in Holmes's way of seeing it, because he did not dwell in bitterness. He saw crookedness clearly, but never as the whole of man. He knew too much of courage for that. Bell then gave us a fact which changed the direction of the inquiry again. On the afternoon of the murder, he had delivered a sealed envelope from Mercer to Miss Ruth Alvarez. He did not know its contents, but he knew Mercer, trusted her mind. Holmes at once requested another interview. Miss Alvarez arrived within the hour, tired yet composed. She was younger than I had first guessed, though strain had added years to her expression. There is a special exhaustion that comes to people whose work is precise and whose environment is careless with them, and she bore it. When Holmes asked about the envelope, she admitted that Mercer had sent her a set of copied figures and asked her one question only: if two data streams claimed to come from separate runs, could they nevertheless have been derived from the same altered source? Alvarez had worked through the matter and concluded that they could. Tiny repeated irregularities, invisible to most readers, recurred in both streams. It was like finding the same scratch on two different mirrors. Holmes listened with great approval. "And what did you do?" he asked. She answered that she went to Mercer with her conclusion. But he had already begun his private approach to the guilty party. She urged him to stop and go straight to Harrow. Mercer had refused. He believed, said Alvarez, that the cento was still young enough to be saved quietly. There was something so tender and tragic in that sentence that even Holmes was silent for a moment. Young enough to be saved quietly. It was not merely a thought about a workplace. It was a thought about nations, dreams, and new institutions everywhere. In the early years of any grand undertaking, people still hope that corruption can be cut out without blood, that honor can be restored before cynicism hardens. Mercer, from all accounts, had loved the agency with a quiet, practical love. He had not loved its glory, but its purpose. He had wanted the thing itself to remain clean. Holmes afterwards said to me that Mercer represented a kind too often forgotten in public history. Great projects are remembered through names at the top, and disasters at the bottom. But they are truly held together by the patient consciences in the middle. When one of those consciences is removed, the building trembles. Miss Alvarez also revealed that she had herself been warned, though indirectly, to leave the matter alone. A note, unsigned, had been slipped between the pages of a technical volume in the analysis room. It contained only a few words, typed without flourish, advising that loyalty to the mission required discretion. Holmes examined the note and smiled with no mirth at all. "When villains speak of loyalty," said he, "they usually mean silence for the convenience of cowards." Yet he did not dismiss the phrase. On the contrary, he worried at it. Loyalty to the mission. Such language suggested the guilty party did not think of himself as a common criminal. He imagined himself a guardian. Holmes has often told me that the most dangerous liar is the one who wraps his selfishness in service. Such a man can commit almost any wrong while preserving in his own mind the appearance of duty. Chapter of Dr. Pike and the Smell of Smoke. Doctor's Doctor. Howard Pike received us in his office with a courtesy so smooth that it seemed less like manners than polish. He was a handsome man, in a hard way, square-jawed, broad-shouldered, and impeccably neat, with hair touched by early gray and eyes that did not quite warm even when he smiled. I had met many successful physicians in London who possessed a similar bearing. They had learned to perform calm rather than live it. Pike spoke of Mercer with sadness, of course. He condemned the violence, praised Mercer's competence, and expressed faith in the investigation, all in terms so measured that one might have set a pendulum by them. Holmes seemed interested chiefly in Pike's pipe. It lay on the desk beside a closed folder, empty and clean. Holmes asked whether Pike still smoked it. Pike replied that he had given up the habit after several warnings about fire risk near sensitive materials. Holmes observed that the bowl had been cleaned recently. Pike said he disliked dust. A very little color rose in his face then, for even polished men dislike being questioned by smaller facts than themselves. The interview proceeded in circles that were only apparently aimless. Holmes moved from test protocols to approval chains, then from approval chains to scheduling pressure, then from scheduling pressure to national expectation. Pike answered readily. He spoke of budgets, headlines, military impatience, congressional oversight, and the challenge of building a new agency under old suspicions. "You cannot imagine," said he, "what it is to have each small delay treated as if one had personally betrayed the future." Holmes replied, "On the contrary, I can imagine it perfectly." It was one of those dry remarks whose depth only appears later. Pike continued, saying that engineering demanded judgment, not panic, and that data often required smoothing, contextualizing, and interpretation to avoid false alarms. Holmes let him speak. Then he asked, very mildly, where interpretation ended and invention began. Pike's smile thinned. He answered that only a fool believed raw figures ever walked into daylight unassisted. Holmes rose, wandered to the window, and remarked that there is a difference between cleaning a lens and painting the stars. Pike did not enjoy that. He turned his chair with a suddenness that betrayed real irritation. In that instant, I thought Holmes had found his first true crack. Yet Pike recovered swiftly. He denied altering any record improperly. He admitted disputes with Mercer, but called them technical disagreements magnified by stress. He had not met Mercer alone on the evening of the murder, though others might say they expected such a meeting because the two had quarreled before. Holmes asked if Pike had access to Laboratory 7 after hours. Of course he had. Many senior staff did. Holmes asked if he had used that access. No. Holmes asked if anyone could confirm his whereabouts. Pike said he had been in a review session, then briefly at home. Holmes did not press the matter further, which surprised me. But upon leaving the office, he said, "He is lying, my dear Watson, though not necessarily about the point everyone will chase first." I asked what part of Pike's account he distrusted most. Holmes answered that it was not the denials, but the philosophy. "He has rehearsed a moral defense," said he, "that is always significant. A simple liar prepares alibis. A dangerous liar prepares principles. I could not but admire the justice of this distinction." Holmes added that Pike's calm was the calm of a man long accustomed to persuading himself that unpleasant steps are merely mature ones. "He may be our murderer," said he, "or he may be the polished face on a chain of uglier acts. In either case, he smells of compromise." He then requested Pike's work logs, travel timings, and any access records tied to the laboratory doors. Unfortunately, early security systems were not the infallible witnesses modern enthusiasts often imagine. Logs existed, but not every entry was dependable. Manual overrides, tailgating, and poor habits had left gaps. Yet Holmes appeared almost pleased by this imperfection. "Excellent," said he. "Where machines are weak, men grow careless. Carelessness is the fingerprint of institutions." That evening, while the sea air moved softly through the palms and the center settled into another night of uneasy labor, Holmes asked me to accompany him on a walk. We passed low buildings, long roads, skeletal towers, and fenced compounds lit by lamps that cast islands of silver in the dark. Overhead, the sky spread vast and warm, rich with stars unlike the London stars of my memory, for these seemed less distant, as if the flat American night drew them nearer to the earth. Holmes was unusually thoughtful. He spoke not only of the case but of age. He said that the coming of rockets did not make the old arts useless. It made them more necessary. When mankind reaches farther, said he, its lies also reach farther. A forged ledger may ruin a family. A forced trajectory may ruin generations. Therefore, one must send reason to climb alongside ambition. There was no vanity in the remark. He said it as another man might say, one must carry an umbrella in rain. I asked whether he felt himself a relic among these engines. Holmes gave a short laugh. A relic, Watson, is a thing looked at and no longer used. I have no objection to being old, provided I remain useful. He was quiet for a little. Besides, every age believes itself entirely new. It is seldom correct. Fear, pride, love, greed, sacrifice, loyalty, self-deception, courage. The machinery changes. The souls do not. That truth, spoken beneath the American stars, soothed me in a way I had not expected. We were far from Baker Street, far from the world in which I had first known him, yet his mind still moved with the same firm grace among human motives. The century might stride into the heavens if it wished. Holmes would still ask who lied, who suffered, who profited, who trembled, and who was brave when no one watched. Chapter of the tape. That whispered. The breakthrough came from a source so ordinary that any policeman in a hurry would have missed it. A technician in the instrumentation unit, hearing that Holmes had been studying old records, mentioned almost in passing that one of the test rooms used backup audio reels to capture spoken status calls during long-run equipment checks. The system was imperfect and often noisy, but on the evening of Mercer's death, Laboratory 7 had been linked for a calibration sequence. The tape had not been reviewed because investigators had focused on physical evidence. Holmes's eyes lit with a quiet intensity that made the young technician step back. Within half an hour, we were in a narrow playback room listening to a reel whose hiss and crackle seemed at first too poor to bear any meaning at all. Yet meaning was there. At the beginning came the ordinary murmur of work, chair movement, paper shifting, the distant click of metal against metal. Then Mercer's voice, unmistakable in its steady gentleness, saying that he had asked for this meeting because the matter could not wait. Another voice answered, low and blurred. We strained to hear it. Holmes held up a hand for silence, even though neither of us had spoken. The tape ran on. Mercer spoke again, saying that the figures had been altered across more than one submission and that he had proof enough to take to Harrow. The second voice replied with sharper force, though the words broke in static. One phrase, however, came through with cruel clarity. It was this: you think truth is more important than timing. Then there came a scrape, a shuddering impact, Mercer's breath leaving him in a sound I hope never again to hear, and after that a confusion of movement, too wild and brief to decipher. The reel ended in a hiss like distant rain. Holmes played it 3 more times. On the final replay, he asked for the volume lowered and the speed adjusted slightly. This yielded very little in the way of language. But one new sound emerged, faint beneath the rest. It was the chime of a metal object striking a hard floor and rolling in a small circle before stopping. Holmes leaned back and closed his eyes. A pocket instrument, said he, or perhaps a lighter. He then asked whether the tape machine clock was dependable. The technician said it was usually accurate within less than a minute. The time of the recorded confrontation narrowed our field considerably. Several possible suspects lost their alibis at once, and others became newly interesting. More than this, the phrase about truth and timing cut deeply into Holmes's prior reflections. Whoever faced Mercer had indeed fashioned the moral excuse. The killer, or at least the speaker, believed delay and schedule were worth lives. That placed the crime squarely inside the pressure system of the institution. And yet Holmes remained dissatisfied. "Voice, evidence can seduce," said he as we left the room. "One hears what one is prepared to hear." He would not identify the blurred second speaker, though Harrow, upon hearing the tape, immediately named Pike as the most likely candidate. Holmes refused to endorse it. "Likely," said he, "is not the same as proven. I should hate to hang a man because his pride sounds familiar through static." This restraint frustrated Harrow, who had by then reached the edge of his endurance. He wanted the nightmare ended. Newspapers were circling. Military contacts had begun making clipped telephone calls. Washington was asking questions. Fear has a way of making even upright men long for swift conclusions, and Harrow was no exception. He pressed Holmes to say whether Pike should be detained formally. Holmes answered that one arrest made too early could free the true architect forever. Harrow turned away in anger, then mastered himself and apologized. Holmes accepted the apology without comment. That same night, Miss Shaw brought us an additional thread. She'd reviewed courier slips and discovered that on the day before the murder, a package of corrected data summaries had been moved from Pike's office to security review, then from security review to executive filing, with times that overlapped so strangely they could not all be true. The name attached to the security transfer was Calvin Reed. Holmes asked to see Reed at once. The man arrived with a soldier's posture and a face shaped by duty into permanent caution. He did not bristle as Pike had bristled. He met every question directly, and perhaps too directly. He admitted handling sensitive files, denied any role in technical adjustments, and stated that his work existed only to protect the mission from leaks, theft, and foreign interest. Holmes asked if internal embarrassment also counted as a threat. Reed answered that public panic could damage national confidence. Holmes asked if false confidence was preferable. Reed's jaw tightened. He said that scientists liked pure truth because they did not have to manage consequences. Here again, Holmes found a moral framework already prepared. It differed from Pike's, but rhymed with it. Reed spoke not of schedules, but of stability. He implied that some truths, if released at the wrong moment, harmed the greater good. It is a seductive doctrine, especially in times of rivalry and fear. I, who had seen war, could not dismiss it entirely. There are facts which, in battle, are guarded for sound reason. Yet the more Reed spoke, the less I trusted his confidence in deciding which facts belong to the people and which to power. Holmes afterward remarked that when institutions are born under pressure, secrecy often arrives dressed as patriotism. Sometimes that dress is deserved. Sometimes it conceals rot. The difficulty lies in telling the difference before the rot learns to salute. Reed gave one fact of real value, though perhaps without understanding its worth. On the evening of the murder, he had received a telephone call from an internal line near Laboratory 7. The caller did not speak. Reed had heard only breathing and then a click. He had assumed it was a line error. Holmes asked the exact time, and it aligned almost perfectly with the period just after the struggle captured on tape. "Then our killer," said Holmes softly, reached for authority and drew back. This idea fascinated him. A murderer, bold enough to strike Mercer, had nearly sought help or cover or command, and then changed course. Such hesitation suggested that the crime, though perhaps prepared in one sense, had in another sense broken from plan. "Good," Holmes murmured. Nothing reveals a soul like the point where intention fails. Chapter of the hidden room in the mind. There are cases in which the outward facts advance more quickly than the inward understanding. And there are others, rarer and more difficult, in which the emotions and beliefs of the people involved form the true map, while physical clues merely point toward it. This NASA case belonged to the latter kind. Holmes said as much on the morning when he shut himself away for several hours and would see no one, not even me, save to ask for a newspaper, a pot of tea, and the old violin which he had brought all the way from England as casually as another man might bring slippers. To the closed door I heard no melody, only scattered notes, thin and searching, rising and breaking off like thoughts not yet ready for speech. I have heard great musicians play with more technical beauty than Sherlock Holmes, but I have never heard any instrument used with greater honesty. He played not for an audience, but for alignment. When words crowded him, music opened a corridor through which they could pass. At last he emerged, pale, composed, and hungry for the first time in 2 days. Over neglected breakfast, he laid out not a full solution, but a pattern of souls. Mercer, he believed, had uncovered falsified or dangerously massaged test data. Pike likely knew of such handling and had justified it as necessary smoothing under schedule strain. Reed likely facilitated the protection of compromised records under the banner of mission security, but neither explanation alone accounted for the emotional shape of the murder, the words on the tape, the near call to security, the later staging of a head injury, and the dust on the inner door handle all suggested someone torn between roles. Our killer, Holmes said, was not merely defending a lie. He was defending a self-image. He needed to believe himself useful, loyal, perhaps even noble, while doing something vile. Therefore, he is not our loudest ego. He is our most frightened conscience. I stared. The not Pike? Holmes shrugged lightly. Pike may still be implicated, but pride that polished does not gasp toward authority after a blow. It commands itself too smoothly. Reed, on the other hand, might call and hang up, but the technical chain is less naturally his. No, Watson, I suspect a person closer to the scene where numbers become records and records become policy. Someone who touched both truth and its packaging. Someone overlooked because he seems merely secondary. At once I thought of Bell, but Holmes shook his head before I could speak. Too young, too cracked by grief. His terror is not performative. He knows more than he has said. Yes, but he is not our striking hand. Holmes then surprised me by naming a person I had scarcely considered beyond the edges of previous interviews. It was Margaret Vale, Deputy Records Coordinator, a middle-aged administrator with a plain face, a tidy manner, and the sort of moderate voice that vanishes in larger rooms. I remembered her only dimly. She had brought folders during our first day and apologized for missing one memo due to a filing delay. Holmes explained that her position placed her at a critical crossing point. She handled correction notices, circulation routing, and duplicate approvals. She had access without spectacle. She had reason to know which technical changes were harmless and which were not, at least in a procedural sense. More importantly, she had once worked under military contract before the agency's founding, where delays had carried political cost. Such people, said Holmes, often absorb institutional fear into their bloodstream. They begin to believe that smoothness itself is virtue. Yet, why would she meet Mercer alone? Why kill? Holmes admitted the answer was not complete. But he had learned one more thing. Through a quiet inquiry among housing clerks, he discovered that Vale's son, a pilot hopeful, had been awaiting recommendation for a program tied to the center. Her loyalty may have been personal as well as professional. One damaged review, one scandal, one slipped schedule could threaten more than a project in her mind. It could threaten her child's future. I protested that this seemed a thin bridge to murder. Holmes agreed. A thin bridge, yes. But men and women cross thin bridges every day when fear blows behind them. He then asked that Vale be observed discreetly, not arrested. He also requested that a false notice be circulated within a limited circle. The notice would state that Mercer's final private copies had been recovered intact and would be reviewed by Harrow that evening. It was bait, simple and dangerous. I objected at once. If the killer believed incriminating materials had surfaced, might they not strike again, or flee, or destroy further evidence? Holmes replied that all those possibilities were instructive, provided we were ready. Harrow reluctantly approved the plan. though I believe he did so only because events had carried him beyond trust in ordinary methods. The day passed under a strange hush. NASA, though outwardly busy, seemed to hold its breath. Word of the internal review notice spread just enough. Home station men where he wished them, but not in ways the guilty party could easily read. He placed me, to my surprise, not near the archives, but in the side corridor, adjoining a small records office used for overflow storage. "Watch," he said, "and above all, notice what is not done." He himself disappeared, which is never a restful thing for his companion. Twilight softened the windows. Office lamps glowed one by one. Typewriters fell quiet. Footsteps thinned. Then, sometime after dusk, I heard the faint turn of a key. The door at the far end of the corridor opened. Margaret Vale entered, alone, carrying not a bag but an empty file tray. She moved with the practiced economy of a woman who wishes not to be remembered by the furniture. She looked neither left nor right. She went straight into the records office and shut the door behind her. I waited 3 heartbeats, then 4. There came no sound. At the 6th heartbeat, Holmes was beside me as silently as if he had risen from the wall itself. He inclined his head, and together we approached. The door was not fully latched. Through the narrow crack, I saw Vale standing before a cabinet, one hand over her mouth, the other riffling folder tabs with desperate speed. There was no triumph in her, no greed, no melodramatic villainy. There was only panic. Holmes stepped in. She spun so suddenly that the tray dropped from her hand. It struck the floor with the exact metal chime we had heard, faintly, on the laboratory tape. My very skin tightened. She stared at Holmes, then at me, and in that instant something collapsed inside her face. Not innocence, not guilt newly born. Something more tragic than either. It was the collapse of the last excuse. She did not run. She sat down instead, as if her bones had turned to sand. Holmes closed the door gently behind us. "Mrs. Vale," said he with infinite sadness, "the time for protecting the mission has ended. The time for protecting the dead has begun." Chapter of the confession in a small voice. Her confession in a small voice. Her confession did not come all at once. No true confession ever does. It comes in waves, first breaking against the easiest rocks, then moving inward toward the blacker places. Margaret Vale began by denying murder, then admitted the meeting, then denied intent, then described only the struggle. Then at last, under Holmes's patient gaze, entered the deeper chamber where intention and panic had woven themselves too tightly to separate. She had indeed become part of the correction chain weeks before Mercer's death. What began as minor procedural smoothing, done at Pike's urging and under Reed's broad insistence on stability, had grown little by little into something worse. Data anomalies were softened. Approval timings were adjusted. Duplicate copies replaced originals. No one step felt, to her, like betrayal. Each felt like a patch. Each felt temporary. Each could be defended by urgency, reputation, or national need. By the time Mercer began tracing the pattern, Vale was no longer protecting paperwork. She was protecting the whole story she had told herself about what good service required. Holmes asked whether Pike knew the extent of the record manipulation. She said he knew enough to benefit from it, and enough to choose not to ask every question. Reed knew enough to keep review channels narrow, but the actual filing alterations, the signatures reattached, the timestamps shifted, the quiet cleaning of the trail, those had largely been hers. "I thought I was helping them keep order," she whispered. "I thought if the center made one bad public step, everything could come apart. I thought there were enemies waiting. I thought if I kept the machinery smooth, the honest work could continue." Her voice broke. "Then, Dr. Public." Mercer looked at me like he could still see the person I meant to be. Here was the center of it. Mercer had not threatened her in the crude sense. He had offered that fatal private reckoning Bell had described. He met her in Laboratory 7 because he had traced the altered circulation marks back to her office. He told her he would go to Harrow unless she gave him the whole chain, names and all. He had hoped, unbelievably and beautifully, to save her by giving her a chance to tell the truth first. But that mercy struck her not as rescue. It struck her as unbearable exposure. She said that when he spoke of honesty, all she could think of was her son, the program review, the political scrutiny, the papers, the years of being useful by never being noticed. Her whole life had taught her that quiet women held systems together by preventing embarrassment. To become the embarrassment herself was more than she could endure. When Mercer turned toward the desk to gather his copies, she seized the nearest metal instrument and struck him. The blow staggered him, but may not have killed him. He fell, struck the edge of the table, and collapsed. In terror, she staged a scene badly damaged his head, further destroyed part of his graph comparison, nearly phoned security lost her tray or dropped it in the struggle, and then fled after smearing dust on the inner handle while trying to create the impression of movement through the room. There are confessions that release a room, and confessions that burden it further. This was of the second kind. I felt no satisfaction, only a heavy human sorrow. Margaret Vale did not fit any easy picture of evil. That was precisely why the case cut so deeply. She was ordinary in the most dangerous sense, for she had let small wrongs teach her how to carry larger ones. Holmes listened without triumph. He asked her where Mercer's remaining copies had gone. She told him she had searched for them, but had not found all. One set, she believed, had been hidden by Mercer before the meeting. Holmes later recovered these from the lining of a weathered technical manual in Mercer's office, where the engineer had tucked them with a caution born too late. Those papers, combined with Alvarez's analysis, the archive irregularities, the tape, Bell's testimony, and Vale's statement, formed the true spine of the case. Pike and Reed were confronted separately. Pike did not confess to murder, for he had not delivered the blow, but neither could he deny the moral architecture in which the murder had become possible. Under pressure, and when shown the recovered documents, he admitted authorizing selective presentation of unstable results to avoid program damage. He insisted this was temporary, strategic, and meant to preserve long-term success. Holmes looked at him with such cold weariness that I almost pitied the man. "You did not build the future," said Holmes. "You merely borrowed it on fraud." Reed proved harder. He retreated at once into language of national necessity and chain of command discipline. Yet even he could not stand against the documented routing irregularities and the evidence of restricted review manipulation. He had not forged the numbers, but he had helped create the protected corridor in which lies could travel without light. Harrow received the full account in silence so deep that the ticking wall clock seemed rude. When Holmes had finished, the administrator stood by the window for a very long time. I had expected outrage. Instead, there came from him a kind of old grief. "We have not even left the ground," he said at last, "and already we have learned how easy it is to fall." Holmes answered, "That lesson, sir, may yet save you." It was a stern comfort, but a real one. Institutions, like persons, are not defined only by their wound, but by whether they choose afterward to heal truthfully or to powder the bruise and deny it. Harrow, to his credit, chose the harder road. Internal reports were made, oversight was widened, procedures changed, careers ended. The scandal was contained in certain respects, as great powers always seek to contain what shames them. But the technical corrections did not vanish into a drawer. Mercer's name, though not publicly elevated at once, remained attached in quiet circles to the insistence that honest data is a form of mercy. Chapter of the long night after the solving. One might imagine that when the truth was laid bare and the guilty named, peace at once descended. It did not. Solving a mystery is not the same as healing what the mystery has torn. For several nights after Vale's confession, the center seemed even more subdued than before, as if the people working there had lost not merely trust in certain colleagues, but trust in their own innocence about the place itself. Young engineers who had arrived dreaming of bright, clean progress now walked with heavier steps. Secretaries paused before files with new caution. Mathematicians reviewed old assumptions with an inward shiver. Harrow aged visibly. Pike vanished into formal review. Reed became a shadow moving under escort. Vale, once so invisible, was now pitied and feared in equal measure. Bell moved about like a man who had survived a shipwreck, only to discover the shore was not home. Alvarez returned to her calculations with grim calm. Miss Shaw kept the machinery of inquiry running with a steadiness that won my deepest respect. Holmes, having brought the truth to light, entered one of those reflective phases that came upon him after cases whose human cost outweighed their puzzle value. He was never sentimental in the cheap sense, but certain sorrows stayed with him. One evening, I found him seated on a low rise overlooking a dark marsh near the center grounds. The frogs called softly. The sky was mild and deep. He had no pipe lit, only the empty stem between his fingers. "Do you know, Watson," he said without turning, "why this affair disturbs me more than many bloodier ones?" I answered that I thought it was because the crime grew by inches rather than leaps. Exactly. The murder did not begin as a murderer. The institution did not begin as corrupt. The lie was invited in by usefulness, one polite inch at a time. He drew a breath of sea-scented air. That is how civilizations ruin themselves as well. Not with villains marching through the gate, but with tired guardians moving the gate a little to save trouble. We sat together in companionable silence. There are friendships in which silence is absence, and others in which it is a room both may share. Ours by then was surely of the latter kind. I thought of our long road from London to this place of rockets and palms. I thought of how many versions of Sherlock Holmes I had known. The fierce young magician, the restless bohemian of Baker Street, the cold pursuer of criminals, the hidden patriot, the solitary beekeeper in retirement, and now this elder investigator watching a newborn age with the same unwavering eye. It occurred to me then that what made him great was not merely his intellect, extraordinary as that was. It was his refusal to let complexity become fog. He never claimed that human beings were simple. He knew they were not. But he believed, almost morally, that confusion should not be worshipped. One must work through it, name the parts honestly and act. There was deep comfort in that belief, even in grief. At length Holmes spoke again. He said that Mercer had in a sense won. I looked at him in surprise. "Won?" said I. "He's dead." Holmes nodded. "He is. Dead and therefore beyond reward. But his warning was not buried. His document survived. His document survived. His judgment proved sound. His murderer confessed. The false path was checked before it could travel further into design. He paid too much, but the truth he served did not die with him." Such was Holmes's stern arithmetic of moral endurance. It did not erase loss. It refused only to grant final victory to deceit. I have carried that lesson with me ever since. Chapter of the Morning of Rockets. In the days that followed, Holmes and I were invited to witness a test firing from a safe observation distance. Harrow, perhaps wishing to show us that the agency would continue, perhaps needing himself to believe it, arranged the visit quietly. We stood among engineers, officers, analysts, and laborers as the vehicle was prepared. Dawn stretched in pale bands across the horizon. The structure on the pad looked at once clumsy and magnificent, like a metal prayer too heavy for heaven and too hopeful for earth. Holmes watched, not the machine at first, but the faces around it. Some were anxious, some resolute, some strangely peaceful. Whatever scandal had passed through the center, the old hunger remained. Men and women still wished to rise. That fact moved me more than I can say. When the firing came, the sound reached us not merely through the ears, but through the bones. Flame burst downward in a white-gold storm. Steam and smoke rolled outward. The whole morning seemed to shake itself awake. For one wild instant, I felt that mankind had become a child again, reckless, bright, half-blind, running toward a sea it did not understand, and calling the danger beautiful. Holmes, to my surprise, smiled. It was not his usual dry smile. It held wonder. "There," said he softly. His aspiration made noisy. Yet even as he spoke, I knew he was thinking of Mercer and the documents and the lies that had crept into the shadow of such aspiration. Great dreams do not excuse care. They demand more of it. That perhaps was the case in one sentence. After the test, Harrow thanked Holmes in private. It was an awkward gratitude. For what gift can match the saving of a future no one can fully see? Holmes accepted it with little ceremony. He asked only that Mercer's technical concerns be preserved accurately in internal history, and that those who raised uncomfortable truths in the future be given a clearer path to protection. Harrow promised as much. Whether every promise of powerful men is kept, I cannot say. But in this instance, enough was done to matter. Procedures changed. Review redundancy improved. No institution becomes pure by memo, yet habits can be altered, and altered habits save lives. Miss Alvarez came to bid us farewell before our departure. She thanked Holmes, then turned to me and said that I should write the story someday, though perhaps not too soon. "People like clean legends," she said, "but this one should stay human. I assured her that if I wrote it, I should do my best." She smiled faintly and answered that truth and kindness rarely travel together unless someone insists. That sentence has remained with me. Miss Shaw also came, carrying a folder of non-sensitive public materials about the center, which she thought I might find of historical interest. Bell, still grieving, could barely speak, but he shook Holmes's hand with such earnest force that no words were needed. As for Vele, Pike, and Reed, the paths moved away into the machinery of formal consequence, where history often becomes dry at the very point where it ought to remain wet with moral warning. Chapter of the Homeward Sea. The voyage home was quieter than the voyage out, when we had first crossed the Atlantic toward America. There had been about Holmes a certain sharpened expectancy, as if the unusualness of the summons had pricked even his seasoned mind into fresh alertness. Returning, he was composed in a thoughtful way which meant the case continued to live within him. I spent long hours on deck beneath a mild sky, watching the water fold and unfold behind us like endless dark silk. The ship's engines beat steadily below. Around us moved ordinary travelers with their ordinary concerns, and there was comfort in that. After the charged atmosphere of the center, the slow civility of shipboard life felt almost holy. Holmes joined me there one evening at sunset. The sea had turned to bronze. He carried a blanket draped over one arm, for the wind had sharpened. Without a word, he handed it to me, an act of care he would likely have denied if thanked too warmly. We stood at the rail while gulls, far from any shore, wheeled briefly then vanished. "You are composing the account already," said he. I admitted that I was. He gave a small nod. "Then leave out anything that flatters me too much. Include Mercer. Include the machinery of excuse. Include the young. They are the point. That was Holmes always. For all the legend that grew about him, he disliked becoming the center of moral gravity in his own cases. He knew that stories, if carelessly told, turn justice into performance. And what of NASA itself? I asked. He watched the horizon. "Right that it was young," said he at last. "Young enough to dream greatly. Young enough to lie from fear. And young enough to be corrected. That is a kind of hope." I considered then the strange pairing at the heart of our adventure, the most famous detective of the old world and the newest dream factory of the new. At first glance, the combination might seem almost whimsical. The tale fit more for fancy than history. Yet the longer I reflected, the more natural it appeared. Sherlock Holmes had always belonged wherever reason stood guard against harm. Why should the frontier space be exempt from that old service? Rockets may alter the map of human travel, but they do not change the need for honesty in measurement, humility in power, or courage in witness. If anything, they magnify those needs until failure in them becomes planetary. Holmes had gone to NASA, not because it was fashionable or dramatic, but because the birth of great things is precisely where clear eyes are most needed. Chapter of the telling years. Time, which softens some memories and sharpens others, did interesting work upon the NASA affair. In the years that followed, the public story of early spaceflight became full of thunder, flags, launches, speeches, and the brave faces of test pilots and engineers. Much of that glory was deserved. Men did rise machines, more powerful and more fragile than anything earlier centuries could have imagined. Calculations once made by hand opened paths through the sky. Small offices became world historical rooms. Yet beneath the famous pictures ran lesser-known streams of labor, doubt, correction, and ethical strain. I came to see that the Mercer case belonged not outside the great story, but inside it, as a hidden chamber belongs inside a house. You may ignore the chamber if you wish, but the house is changed by its existence. Holmes himself seldom spoke of the matter unless I raised it, though on 2 later occasions he referred to it while commenting on public enthusiasm about technology. Once, reading of a new achievement, he observed that mankind always falls in love first with what it can do and only later asks what kind of character is needed to do it safely. Another time, when a politician praised progress as if it were a machine that ran by itself, Holmes snorted and said progress is a cart forever requiring honest hands at the wheels. These remarks may seem severe, but he was not an enemy of advancement. Quite the contrary. He admired discipline and ingenuity more than most men I have known. What he despised was idolatry. No engine, no theory, no institution, no nation, in his view, was improved by being worshipped. They were improved by scrutiny. As for my own heart, the case altered something there as well. I had long admired courage in soldiers, doctors, policemen, explorers, and the humble poor who endure more quietly than headlines ever notice. But after NASA, I began to admire with deeper seriousness the courage of the conscientious technician, the junior analyst, the records clerk who refuses to backdate a form, the assistant who speaks against a superior, the mathematician who says the numbers are wrong when the room wishes otherwise. These people seldom receive statues, yet whole futures rest upon them. Mercer was one of them. Alvarez was one of them. Even Bell, in his frightened way, nearly became one through loyalty and truth. If I write warmly of such figures, it is because history too often walks past them on its way to brighter monuments. Chapter of the Last Lamp. There is one final image I cannot omit, for it remains the truest to the spirit of that adventure, and perhaps to the spirit of Holmes himself. It occurred not in London, not in a grand chamber of state, not before a launching crowd, but in a dim administrative office at NASA, shortly before our departure. Evening had fallen. Most staff had gone. A cleaning woman was moving quietly down the corridor with a cart that rattled softly over the tiles. Holmes had returned alone to leave a note for Harold, found in the nearly dark room, Miss Shaw still at her desk under a single lamp. She was correcting a filing cross-reference so that most of his internal concerns would not vanish beneath the largest scandal paperwork. It was small work, dull work, invisible work. Holmes paused at the door and watched for a moment. He told me later that nothing in the entire case gave him greater peace than that sight. A grand dream had been shaken by fear, touched by vanity, and stained by blood, yet there, in the yellow light of one late lamp, An honest mind was still putting the record right. That is civilization, if one must reduce it. Not the speeches, not the engines, not even the heroic portraits. It is a steady act of setting the page in order because truth deserves a place to rest. Holmes left his note and did not disturb her. She was doing, he told me, what all the best people in history have done, though nobody remembers their names. She was preventing the next lie from finding a chair. Chapter of the gentle conclusion. And so the story of Sherlock Holmes at NASA came to its close, not with a shout, but with a lowering of troubled voices into something quieter and more lasting. We had traveled from the old, fog-bound world of London rooms and violin music into the bright humming halls of a newborn space age. We had seen a dead engineer become, through loss, a guardian of truth. We had seen ambition turn practical, then fearful, then false. We had seen how murder can grow not only from hatred, but from a long habit of moving small wrong things out of sight. We had seen, too, the answering forces that keep the world from sinking entirely into darkness: friendship, witness, moral patience, exact thought, and the brave refusal to let a comforting lie outrank a dangerous fact. Sherlock Holmes, who began his career reading ash on a sleeve and mud on a boot, ended the strange American chapter, reading tapes, correction slips, dust smears, and the weak places in institutional souls. Yet he was the same man throughout. He listened where others assumed. He doubted what flattered power. He honored the dead by insisting the living speak clearly. Dr. Watson, if I may include myself in the record, followed as he had always followed, not merely as companion and chronicler, but as one human heart trying to understand the shape of another. Between us there remained that old and gentle bond made not from perfection, but from trust tested many times and never broken. In that bond I have always found my own rest. NASA went on, as great human efforts do. It carried its engines upward. It learned, stumbled, rose, corrected, and dreamed again. The stars remained where they had always been, cold and beautiful and silent above the quarrels of men. Yet because of the work of some who are remembered and many who are not, the path toward them became a little cleaner, a little safer, and a little more honest than it might have been. That is no small legacy. Dr. Elias Mercer did not live to see the fuller flowering of the age he served, but in a quiet and serious sense, he helped protect it. Margaret Vale became a warning. Pike and Reed became examples of the danger in polished compromise. Alvarez, Shaw, Bell, and others like them became part of the hidden foundation beneath public triumph. If you imagine that history is made only in bright moments, you will miss the deeper truth. History is also made in file rooms, in late corrections, in private acts of conscience, in the instant when a frightened person chooses either silence or honesty, and in the calm mind that can still tell one from the other. That was the gift Sherlock Holmes carried to NASA. He brought not magic, but attention. He brought not noise, but clarity. And in an age already reaching toward the moon, clarity was as necessary as fuel. Now the night grows softer around this tale. The laboratory lamps dim in memory. The Florida sea breeze moves again through the palms. Somewhere far away, an engine cools after fire. Somewhere in London, a violin waits in its case. Holmes has turned from the window at last. Watson closes his notebook. The dead are honored. The truth is named. And the great unfinished future, with all its danger and wonder, lies sleeping beneath the stars for just a little while longer.